Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Love, Life and Disability with me, Kate Ashton. Today, I'm joined by Robert. Now, I came across Robert when I was on the Pure Gym website as one of the personal trainers, and he was giving a lot of information on there about disability and accessibility and how you can get involved in fitness. So a little bit about Robert. At 10 months old, Rob was involved in a car crash incident that left him paralysed from the armpits down. Now, as a personal trainer, Rob is calling on all gyms to be more inclusive, especially for people with disabilities. At the age of 16, Rob started in the gyms, and as many of us know, things like accessibility and inclusivity really need to be thought about from the off, because in doing this, it also saves money further down the line, and it just means it can be for absolutely everybody. And sometimes that's not the case. So non-disabled people are always implementing things, as we know, in gyms and in life without consulting us first. Nothing about us without us. As we know, accessibility is often thought about last. How important is it to build an inclusive environment from the off? So today, I thought it'd be fantastic to talk to Rob about this. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you, Kate. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you touched upon a lot of good points there, for sure. The world is 100% not designed for people with disabilities, especially physical ones, that's for sure. So it's really important for every industry, not just the fitness one, to at least consult us when they're designing their buildings and their businesses and stuff. And the gym is no exception to that.
And I do find that is one of the biggest problems, as quite a lot of people do say in the disabled community. It's nothing about us without us. Sometimes we're always thought about last. It's, oh, we need to speak to the disabled people and find things out. Or they only do that when there's a problem.
Yeah, exactly that. There's no foresight. There's no planning ahead. They don't sit there and think, would it be worthwhile putting a focus group together of disabled people of all different disabilities to see, if you're building a hotel, for example, how would we design the bathroom in here for the accessible room, as a full-time wheelchair user who can't stand, it's amazing how many hotels I've been in that have like fold-down seats attached to the wall, but the shower is on the opposite wall. So the only way that you can actually grab the shower head is if you stood up to grab the shower head. So it just goes to show that lack of foresight just really isn't there. And by the time that they actually go and consult people with disabilities to ask how we can change things, it's normally too late by then, and they don't want to spend the money to fix things.
Yeah, and as we know, if they do it from the off, this whole budgeting thing, people just see disability as an expense. Well, it's not if you think about it from the off. And every disability is different. So what my accessibility arrangements maybe could be completely different to yours as well. And this is why it's so important. Gyms, hotels, absolutely everywhere, do consult a range of people so we can get a real understanding and a breadth of understanding from different people. And there's so many different focus groups out there already. People just need to consult us. And, we're there to help, not like hinder things. We're trying to help them for later.
100%. And I think businesses, the problem that they have is when they think of, how can we make this more accessible for disabled users, they instantly think it's either got to be the very basic adjustments to whatever it is they're adapting that's necessary. Do we have a lift or can they access the building? To them, that's accessibility. Sometimes there's not even a disabled toilet involved. Whereas if they're thinking about, okay, we need to go to the other end of the spectrum where everything needs to be really inclusive, then they straight away go to like the changing places kind of changing rooms that we have in certain places. Obviously, they're top notch. They can almost pretty much cater to any type of disability. But they look at the costs of what those kind of rooms would be and they think, oh, we're absolutely not spending that much money to cater for disability because it's not worth the investment to them from a financial point of view. Is that's the way that they see it. But then there's no middle ground. From experience, I've generally found it's the bare minimum or above and beyond. There doesn't seem to be a decent middle ground, and I think that's what needs to be found first and foremost. Ideally we would have a change in places in every single venue, but I don't see the world through rose-tinted glasses, and you can't do that with disability 9 times out of 10. So a middle ground definitely needs to be found.
No, I totally agree with that. And it's just even thinking about things like Braille, for example, I've got quite a few friends that would read by Braille, and they've gone into the wrong toilets because there's no Braille on the doors for them to know which is which. And even just these little subtle things could help people out. And it's also giving people that breadth of independence as well. And touching upon some of the toilets is when I have been in some gyms recently, I thought it was really interesting. So we get given a fob, and if you're disabled, that means you can then use an accessibility door and you could use the lift within the building. So if you don't have a fob, you can't use it, which is great. But then you've also then got a fob to operate toilets. So if you identify as female, your fob will only let you into the female toilets, which is fantastic. And likewise with the male, into the male. But the accessibility one has no fob. So it's a free-for-all. So for instance, the other week when I was there, trying to go to the toilet, can't go in. And then a bunch of lads just walk out, and it's like, okay, obviously they could have hidden disabilities, you don't know. But people will just use it as convenient sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. And it's a similar thing over at our place where the accessible toilet is 100% a free-for-all, and we only have one accessible toilet.
Mm-hmm.
And the amount of times, I mean, multiple clients, myself included as well, we don't have the best bladder control on a good day, let alone on a bad day. The last thing that you want is, some big, hairy, meathead gym user that's just downed his protein shake and has used a disabled toilet for a bit of privacy because he doesn't realize the damage that it's causing to someone who actually needs to use the toilet.
Yeah.
But, most gyms, if they did something as simple as incorporate a radar key system on the accessible toilet, it would solve so many problems. So many problems.
Even in this case, it's even the fob situation. If you've got it on the male and the female, why not the disabled?
On the disabled, exactly that. It's a really, really easy fix. And it's so frustrating because it's another battle that you have to fight when you shouldn't have to fight it. That's what it feels like with disability. That's what it feels like every single day. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's battle after battle after battle for things that we really shouldn't have to be fighting for. And with a little bit of foresight, a little bit of consultation with those that are going to be using facilities, it will fix so many problems.
Yeah, and one thing I've obviously always said, and I'm sure yourself would agree with this, if we're to build things accessible from the off, that helps everybody. So if I work in media, so let's say you're a makeup artist and you're lugging around a case of makeup all day, or the camera operator, I think you'd much prefer a lift than going up 7 flights of stairs with all your equipment. So if we're to think about how it can impact everybody else, that's when you can make the biggest change. It's like Microsoft, for example. I love what Microsoft explained disability, and that they do something which is like inclusive by design. And they were saying at some point in your life, you will be disabled, even if it's only for a short period of time. And people are like, no, I've never been disabled. And then the question was like, well, do you have children? Yeah, I have children. Okay. Have you ever been to a concert? Yeah, I've been to a concert. So then they kind of explain it in these situations, basically saying, so let's use the concert as an example. They'll say, okay, some people might live with deafness or hearing loss as a permanent situation. You could have temporary hearing loss by having glue ear or maybe an ear infection. But then you could have a situational hearing loss when you're in a very loud venue and you can't hear something. And you're like, what did you say? No, I wanted a Coke. What, you wanted Sprite? You've then got that. And then the same with maybe with like an upper limb difference. So your permanent disability could be an upper limb difference, but you carrying the shopping is a situational one. You're trying to open a door, you've only got use of one hand, or you're carrying a child. You're experiencing some sort of a disability, and the temporary would of course be breakage to the arm. And when you try and make something somebody else's, I don't want to say problem, but giving them the understanding, that's when they then realize, actually, no, this could help everybody.
Yeah. I think when you emailed me and you used the hearing loss one as an example, I loved that. That analogy was so good. Because I think it eloquently puts into words what people are trying to explain. And even myself, I've probably tried to explain that in some way, shape or form and not done it that eloquently. So I love those analogies for sure, but it's bang on right. At any given point, people's lives can change like that, but also, as you say, there are instances where you're going to be temporarily walking in other people's shoes. So if you can have that little bit of foresight and make sure the infrastructure is accessible as possible from the outset, then you're catering to everyone, But I think we've got these old archaic ideas and the way that infrastructure is still done and the way that buildings are still made, or the way that things are adapted, and it's not moved on. It's not moved on for the last 20, 30 years, if not longer. Don't get me wrong. I think the comedian Rosie, the lady with cerebral palsy, I forget her surname, but who I'm on about. She was recently on a podcast as well, where she was talking about how even though there is a long way to go with accessibility, there has been improvements. And then some of the examples she gave in there, where some schools where they were just outright wouldn't put lifts in schools because they legally didn't really have to. So you look at how legislation has changed over the last 25, 30 years. Yes, there have been improvements, but we're still a million miles away from making things inclusive. I actually had a job, so I temporarily worked for 2 years on temporary contract with my local council. And just before I started working there, we had a disability officer for the council, bearing in mind that, I don't live in a small city, I live in a pretty medium-sized city. And when we questioned why they got rid of the disability officer, and when I say got rid of the disability officer, I mean they cut the role entirely. Their reasoning and rationing for it is because everything should already be accessible, therefore we don't need a disability officer to overlook these things. Wow. And honestly, it's the most stupid thing I've ever heard in my life, because yes, you're right, everything should already be accessible, but it really isn't. And we go into the leisure centres in my local council. You kind of go there, and the staff members have no idea in terms of it. The moment they see disability, their usual port of call would be, okay, we'll pass this person on to the disability officer. As soon as you took that away, everyone was flailing, absolutely flailing. And it just goes to show that there is still a need for these things to actually be overlooked, and someone take the lead and properly manage these kind of things.
100% agree. And Jack Fawn last year, during one of his Magna Carta lectures, he spoke about it within TV and film industry, and talking about the accessibility coordinators. And he wants all high-end TV productions to be having accessible coordinators, because he was seeing so many times people forget about the toilets. Yeah, you might hire standard portalies, but what about the ones which need to be accessible? And like for production companies to be like putting lines in the budgets and so forth. And it is everybody's job to be accessible. And again, as you were saying, a lot of time people then will just pass the book. If there's that disability specialist there, sure, everyone will just go to that. Yeah. Where they then don't get the education and learnings and the understandings either. So it can be quite tricky. But if you don't have someone disabled doing the job, again, it's nothing about us without us. And you need that there for that support.
100%. And I think when you have so again, back to the example that I gave with the disability officer, part of the reason why I was drafted in was to help train up the staff in the leisure centres to try and make them more accessible. And during the 2 years there, we managed to get the disability participation across the leisure centres. So we were currently at 2%, and the target was to get to 5%. By the end of the year contract, we were up to 12%. So we absolutely smashed those targets, which are fantastic. Less than 6 months of my role ending, all of that training, all of that work that we put in, because there was no one looking after it, because you have such a high turnover in staff and no one actually taking it by the reins and saying, okay, we're going to make sure that this work continues. What was the point? It all just falls apart. It unravels so much quicker than it takes to actually fix the problems that were in place, which is why you always need that guiding hand.
Totally agree. And it's good that they had it to start with, but I just don't think sometimes people realise the value. And I know you've touched upon there about the leisure centres and so forth, and obviously you're involved in fitness. I'm trying to get into fitness. How have you found it in general with fitness? Like, what do you believe the biggest barriers have been for you so far?
Well, to be fair, I actually ended up in this role completely accidentally. So while I was at university, in my final year, an email dropped into my inbox saying that there was a scheme going on that was trying to get more people with disabilities involved in the fitness industry, and they were doing courses to get you your level 3 fitness and disability, and then also your level 2 fitness instructor qualifications. So at the time, I was like, I can't really do this just yet. I was like, but in the summer, I could probably do it. So if you're still doing it then, please contact me, as I would love to do it. So that was really fortunate, to be fair. I ended up going on that scheme. It was a 3-month program, 3 days a week where we went in and we learned. And then at the end of that 3 months, a 6-week program, not a 3-month program, 6-week program. And then at the end of the 6 weeks, you then got a 3-month placement that you had to do. Ideally, they wanted you to go into leisure centers as a fitness instructor. But my argument was I didn't want to be a fitness instructor. I wanted to be a personal trainer. Subtle differences being that the fitness instructor are those that, teach the classes and, they kind of run the gym and that kind of stuff. They're not actually able to do the one-to-one PT sessions. Whereas for me, I wanted to be able to build my business, do the PT sessions and do all the stuff that a fitness instructor could do, plus more. So after a little bit of back and forth and getting the I's dotted and the T's crossed, we were actually able to go into my local Pure Gym and then spoke to the manager there. And after hounding him a few times to try and get the go ahead from his superiors, I started my 3-month work placement there. And I've been there ever since. So it's been 6 years that I've been over at Pure Gym. So barriers wise in terms of the industry. So at the time that I signed for Pure Gym, I believe I was the first disabled PT in the company. At the time, they had over 150 gyms in the country. So it's that in itself, I think, speaks volumes in terms of getting into the industry is clearly quite difficult. I know that's part of the reason why my manager struggled, because he wasn't sure, health and safety wise or insurance wise or all these extra things that you have to consider having a disabled member of staff on the books as such, even though I'm technically not a member of staff, I'm self-employed. There was all these kind of things, the hoops and things that you have to kind of jump through in order to get there. But once that was initially done, I was fortunate that I had a really good manager that helped, support me when it came to building a business or, trying to get lead gen. And back then as well, Pure Gym, they still do it now as well, but they ran like business seminars as well.
Oh, okay.
So they actually had 2 people that offered to, give PTs a helping hand and give them tips on how to manage their time and build a business and, lead generation, all that kind of stuff. And then for me, I think the biggest thing for me was, I did law at university, and the reason for doing that was because I just wanted to help people. And then when you're studying law, you realize that you're not actually helping people, you're playing a game. That didn't really sit too right with me. And then I kind of panicked because my entire life had been surrounded by, okay, I'm going to become a successful solicitor. And then after doing numerous work placements, I realized by the end of my second year that I wasn't going to be able to practice this full time, partly because I don't think an area of law jumped out at me that I thought that I wanted to study and practice every single day. Also because of being the competitive kind of guy that I am, I knew that it would consume me. The job would 100% consume me. And I think it would interfere with my goals of ultimately wanting to have a family and that kind of stuff. Which is why I kind of, by the end of my second year, had this mini breakdown where I was like, well, what do I do instead? And all I ever knew other than that was physical activity, whether that was sport or gym work or whatever. And then obviously disability, because I've got, by that point, 20 years of lived in experience. So that's how I kind of ended up in this. And like I said, in terms of getting into the fitness industry, I think it was more about at the time when I applied and I actually got into Pure Gym, my boss referred to me as a pit bull. He said, you just kept on hounding me, and you did not let me go. He said, every time you came into the gym to train, he goes, every time you saw me, he was like, you were on me straight away saying like, okay, what is your boss saying? Can I come in? Can I come and join? And all that kind of thing. So I think in that case, it was like, I had to be relentless, I think, in order to be able to get my foot into the door. And like I said, once I got into the door with Pure Gym, it was helpful that there were business programs and there were staff members that were there to be able to help you. For example, like when I started at Pure Gym, I started on shift because that's how they tend to work. You work X amount of hours on shift without payment, and then anything you make from your PT sessions is what is yours. And then eventually, once you've got a good client base, you then move on to rent, where you pay the gym rent to be there, and then it's all you basically, which is what I do now, where I pay rent to use the space, but I'm not teaching classes or running the gym or doing any of that. And the initial plunge when it came to going on to rent, I didn't have the biggest client base. But what I found was it gave me the ability to actually invest that time that I would have had on shift to lead gen. Because I think with me working with disability and injury rehab, most of my clients I'm not going to find on the gym floor, because people with disabilities, they still have that stigma that,
we need to bring them into the space.
Exactly. So the moment that I went from shift onto rent and I actually was able to do outreach outside of the gym, my business skyrocketed. And that was, it took a couple of years for that penny to drop, I think. And I think I only actually went on to rent out of necessity rather than a choice, I think, at the time. But looking back, it was the best thing that I ever did. So yeah. So
Mind Over Matter Fitness was born, and here we are today.
Mind Over Matter Fitness was born. Yeah, it's crazy to think that I set that up in 2017, I think it was, but it's been trading officially since 2019, 2020, I think. 2019.
Oh, wow.
In 2019. So.
And as a disabled person myself trying to get into the fitness, I think it's great that obviously that you live with a disability as well, and that you're able to coach people and deliver the sessions in which you are, because even though it's not the same disabilities, it's that lived experience which I feel can help people, because you'll be more able to look at things from an adaptation perspective. So if I take classes that I've been to recently, some of the classes I'll have to do in my wheelchair because of the nature of the course, and they will run forward and then run back. So then you might say there, oh, well, your wheels are your legs, so then you'd go forward. But then some people are like, oh, well, just kick your arms out to the left and the right. And I'm kind of like, it's more like of an upper body workout than as opposed to my legs, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's, if that conversation may have happened with yourself, you might have been able to think of something adapted. Well, yes, you can move your legs, but you just do it sat down. So you might just kick your legs in and out instead, but remain seated with your brakes on. Another person might say, no, wheel forward, wheel back. Yeah. It's being able to look at it from a different adaptation perspective, which I feel people like yourself can offer. And this is where it's important that if people do live with disabilities, that we do seek out trainers such as yourself, which have those lived experiences of working in that field, because it can be very hard to come by, and especially when a gym might not be an environment that people are used to. It's when I've come in the wheelchair, people just look at me. It's like you're famous. It's just like, you just see all the eyes just follow you through. It's like you've just seen your favourite celebrity walk past, but you know that they're thinking, well, what are they going to do in a wheelchair? It's just, you know what damn well what they're thinking as you're going through. So I guess it's about that, the whole stigma side of things, and what can we do about this in order to educate people that we can do things, and that it's looking at our ability.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, in terms of having that lived in experience, I mean, like I said, when I was at university and then realized I wasn't going to be doing law, I literally sat there in my apartment thinking, well, what am I going to do with the rest of my life, and how am I going to be able to help people? And the fact that I realized that, I'm really great with fitness. I have that lived in disability experience. I can go and help other people like myself, where, when I first joined the gym when I was 16 years old, instructors had no idea, genuinely no idea. And it's not their fault. I think it is purely just a lack of education, I mean, I know that when you do the ordinary personal training course, or level 3, obviously it depends on which governing body you're doing it with and whatnot. But generally speaking, there's a tiny section about 2 pages long that touches on disability, which in itself is, I could write 2 pages of disabilities, let alone 2 pages on how to train people with disabilities. But it is just having that creativity to be able to, adapt exercises to the individual. The last thing you want to be doing is painting every single disability with the same brush. But then also, if a trainer gets someone with a disability coming into their gym and they're asking to train with them, ask them what they can and can't do. Ask them what they can use and work with them together to build the plan, and it's about having that openness and that connection with the personal trainer you're working with, to be able to build a program that works for you, and then figuring out exercises that work for you. And on your stigma point, in terms of when they see people with wheelchairs or disabilities going into the gym, You're right. It goes one or two ways. Like, what are they doing in the gym? What are they going to be able to do? Or it goes to the very nice but slightly patronizing. Oh, you're so inspirational. It's
Yeah.
great to see you out and about in the gym. And it's like, I know
Inspiration porn.
yeah, 100%. But then at the same time, it's one of the reasons why I love doing what I do, because if I'm working with, for example, one of my clients is an ultimate frisbee player, and she's going to Worlds later on this year. So like we're talking top level, like ultimate frisbee player. So when you see someone in a wheelchair who can't jump and catch a frisbee for his life, training this person on improving their speed, their agility, their quickness, their power, all these things, it changes all those stigmas. And it's amazing how many people approach me in the gym to ask to train with me, via email. They might get my phone number, whatever. And then when it comes to the first session, you can kind of see that look on their face because they didn't realize I was disabled. They didn't realize I was a wheelchair user. And that first couple of minutes when you can see them processing as though like, oh, I had no idea this person was in a wheelchair. But it's really cool. It's really cool. And like straight away, I like to address that elephant in the room, make a bit of a joke about it, put everybody at ease. Do you know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, I can't hide my disability. I wouldn't want to hide my disability.
Yeah, it's part of our identity, isn't it?
Exactly that. And it's not a touchy subject. I think this is the other thing as well. Too many people find their disability a touchy subject. I say too many. It's probably 50-50. I think you either embrace it or it's something that you're not too proud of.
Yeah. And disabled is not a dirty word. And some people just don't like saying it. They'll try and avoid it. And as you say, it's like the elephant in the room. It's like trying to address it, talk about it, get it over and done with.
It's the one taboo in society that still hasn't been addressed. It's 2022. And it's still taboo to say disability, and you sit there and you think, why? Like people, to the point where people don't even want to refer to themselves as disabled, even though they have a glaring disability. And it's something that, I've always been pretty headstrong. I've always been, I don't really care what people think. It's the way that I've always kind of been.
Yeah.
But I know that for some people, other people's opinions mean a lot to them, and I understand why. Why that you wouldn't want to be perceived in a negative manner by those people. But then at the same time, it's like, well, why would you want to associate with this kind of people that are going to consider you in a negative manner,
I once read a great quote, and it basically said about you say what you feel, because those that mind don't matter, and those that mind don't matter, basically. So it's basically you can just say what you want, because if they give a crap and you don't like them, it doesn't matter. And 100%. I think it's a good one. But as you say, like with the embracing of the disability, and obviously it becomes part of who you are, and whether or not it's in the gym environments. I know, like when I've gone dating, it's like on Bumble and Hinge, everything's on there. So if they actually looked at the profile and read, they'd actually see I've got a disability. But then when you turn up and you're on a crutch, I'd say 70% of the time, guys have always gone, what have you done to your leg? Like it's like I've hurt it in football.
Yeah.
Some people have completely ignored it, never asked a single question. And I've asked people like, what are their thoughts on that? And some people say, well, it's down to the disabled people to own their own story and tell them when they feel comfortable about their disability. So they would agree with those that don't ask. But the ones that do, people say, because it's how it's being asked, it can be quite rude. And it's trying to, I guess, navigate that. I don't know how you have found any of that with dating and relationships.
I think it is more of a minefield, not just when it comes to disability, but generally speaking about any subject, whether it's LGBTQ or race or anything. Like the pronouns that people are using and the right way to address other people is changing on a daily basis. So it's a minefield in itself. But I think one thing that's for sure is, as a kid, or what I say to people is kind of approach people like you would as a kid, because kids have this innocence and this art of just asking questions because they're curious and they're learning. And that is much, much kinder than standing across the room and staring. But then somewhat we're conditioned as a child, as we start to go through puberty and get a bit older, we're conditioned not to ask questions. So instead we make assumptions that are often wrong, or we just don't end up discussing the subject whatsoever. I mean, I think for me, I've always joked around and said that, when it comes to dating in particular, that I'm never going to be someone's ideal cup of tea purely from looks, because I doubt that anybody's Tinder profile has got disabled wheelchair user tick box on there. Do you know what I mean? So for me, things like the dating apps, all that kind of stuff, I've never actually used, purely because you're not gonna go for me based purely on my looks. It's my personality that you're gonna end up going for me from. That's my biggest selling point, and I think, and it's like I said, it's something that I can't hide. I can't just tuck the wheelchair in my back pocket and be like, this isn't here. But I think, it's one of those things when it comes to dating where it all depends on the individual. You get some people that, they'll just address it straight away, and then they'll be quite open and honest with it. And then you'll get some people that are just massively ignorant to the entire situation. For example, there was this one girl that once asked if I could sneeze. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So because I got a spinal cord injury, her first thought was, "Can you still sneeze?" Which was hilarious. And this was the same girl that we managed to convince that on the plastic cups, the lids that you get for plastic cups, where you've got the diet bit when you press that down to let them know it's Diet Coke. She had a regular Coke, and then we were like, "Oh, if you press this, it turns diet." And then she took it, and she was like, "Oh my God, yeah, I can taste it." And you just kind of sit there with your head in your hands and you think, "Oh my goodness." So yeah, she wasn't the sharpest tool in the box, that's for sure. So
and how did you meet your partner, and if you didn't obviously go on apps and so forth?
So as I say, I am a disability and rehab specialist when it comes to PTing. I guess I'm not the most professional personal trainer, as Emily was my first client in the gym. So she came to me because she was going to have a operation on her knee.
Okay.
She wanted to work on strengthening her leg before the operation, and then also do some upper body work, so that when she was on crutches for the rehab, to make her life on crutches better. And then she had the operation about 3 months later, and then we kept in touch, and then I helped her with the rehab post-op, and then one thing led to another, and 6 years on, here we are.
Oh, that's amazing. And that's what some people say, though, it can happen through work. I don't see it as unprofessional, because that'd be no different from me meeting somebody in my current day job. And obviously now with COVID and so forth, working from home pretty much permanently, it's you don't see people. So the only places now I can really see people would be if I ever went into the office or going to the gym. It's a tricky environment, but then it's navigating that, because obviously if you're meeting by work, people get to know you and your personality. Your disability kind of becomes secondary at that point. It's they get to know you, where obviously on the apps and so forth, it's looks straight away. And I do believe that. I think I'd love an app which is, well, I don't want to judge guys, but a lot of guys will just tick right anyway all the time because they want to double the chances.
Yeah.
But if it's just done based on text, and then the more you talk, the images then are revealed, I think that would be a better way, because then you're getting to know the person and you're matching based on interest. So it just might be pictures or emojis of the things that the people are interested in. You match based on that, you have a chat, you take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, maybe so. I mean, as I said, I think when it comes to dating and that kind of stuff, I've always been pretty good at it, I guess, which is why I've never really needed the apps or anything like that. And I guess, 6 years ago when I got with them, the apps weren't as prominent as they are now, I think. But I had this moment, when I was at university, before I went to university, I actually came out of a previous long-term relationship, and it didn't end too good. And I made the conscious decision while I was at university that I wasn't going to tie myself down to any relationship while I was there, unless something really, really special came along. And then in hindsight, I kind of look back at that and I think that was a bit closed-minded of me. There were potential things there that, I kept the wall up the entire time there, and didn't let people in as I probably should have. And then once I got my professional life all sorted and started working at the gym, I'd had that moment where I sat down and thought, well, it's time to really sort your personal life out at this point.
Yeah.
And I had that dawning moment where it's realistically, I'm only really going to meet people at my place of education, which is at my path, because, I'm not going to education anymore. I'm done with that. Or my place of work, which was the gym. Or I was going to meet someone in my hobbies, which is the gym, or in some sort of sporting arena. Yeah. So I pretty much kind of had that crystallizing moment where it's okay, so I'm going to meet my partner in the gym, which, let's face it, there's worse workplaces you could meet. Sex, right?
Yeah.
and yeah, so it was one of those things where I've always been a firm believer that you've got to be active on in making things happen for yourself, whether it's in your love life or whether it's personal life or professional life. At the end of the day, if something's going to change, it's on you. You've got to do it.
100%.
And like I said, the moment that I changed that mindset to make my personal life a bit better and be a bit more vulnerable with someone, it happened. And like, don't get me wrong, it's really cliche to sound that it happens when you're least looking for it. And
that's
like,
what they always say.
Honestly, but with this case, when I met I'd literally just started in the job. On my first day, she was the first person in the gym that I spoke to. And then 6 months later, we were together. Which, you know, it's you sit there and you think, well, you know, if you told me that would have happened when I first started working in the gym, I would have laughed at you, because you know, Rob at uni was a different Rob to what he is now. So yeah, it's one of those things where you've got to be proactive and you've got to be open-minded to it. It's really funny, actually. On our first date with them, I went to. So I wasn't seeing a girl beforehand, but I was hooking up with a girl beforehand that lived down in Daventry before I went over to America. And then I went over to America on holiday with a couple of the lads. And at the time I was chatting to Em. And then we came back on the Friday morning, well, Saturday morning. By the time we got back into Nottingham, it was like 3 a.m. And then I went to sleep, and I was supposed to go to Daventry and hit the road at 10 a.m. So I woke up about 9 a.m. really jet lagged, and I messaged this other girl and I was like, look, I'm really sorry, but I'm not going to come down today. I'm really jet lagged. Can I come and see you another time? She was obviously not too pleased. And then I was kind of sat here and I was still talking to Em. And then I was like, what are you up to tonight? And then she was like, nothing. Why? And I was like, well, if you're not doing anything, I'm not doing anything. Do you want to go out, grab something to eat? So we grabbed something to eat, went on our first date. And then afterwards we went back to her house. And then I'd made a conscious decision when I was in America to say yes to more things and be more proactive, which is part of the reason why I'd messaged them and said, do you want to go out for something to eat tonight? Just put myself out there, and thought, the worst thing she says is no.
Exactly.
I get lagged. Do you know what I mean? But then afterwards, after we finished the meal and went back to her place, like, her family's house was kind of on a hill and it's not the most accessible to get into. So there was kind of like one step to get up, and then there was another step to get into the house, and then a lip on the door like the doors normally have. So it definitely wasn't easy to get into. And then she was like, oh, do you want to come inside and have a drink? Rob, before America, 100% would have said no, absolutely not. That is not worth the hassle of trying to get my chair into that. And I don't really want to degrade myself, whether it's jumping out of the chair to then lift the chair inside the house and then climbing in, or, you know, it's a male pride thing and an ego thing where you don't really want, you know, this 7.5, 8 stone girl lifting you up into the house. Do you know what I mean? But I was like, screw it. I've made the decision to say yes, so let's say yes. So we went inside. So you got the first step. We managed to get the chair onto it, no problem. It was luckily deep enough to have my chair onto it. And then the second step, kind of popped the wheelie, got the front casters into the door. Em's behind me, and then she's getting ready to kind of lift me up. And then as she does that, you've got the hallway directly in front of me, and then you've got the kitchen at the end. And then I just see this head pop round, and then it's her mum, and then I see another head pop round the door, and it was a dad. So both her parents were awake at this time on the first date. And at this point, I was like, this is why you say no. This is why you say no, you should not have done this. So on the first date, I ended up meeting basically her entire family. And it was a really, really funny first date, to be fair.
That's good though, because it gets it out of the way.
Yeah, it is. It 100% is. Have you ever seen the film Dinner for Schmucks?
Don't think so, no.
It's a Steve Carell film, and it's a comedy where basically they bring the most interesting person to a dinner party, and then whoever brings the most interesting person there, and by interesting, generally people with disabilities or odd characters, essentially. And it's almost like a show and tell of interesting people. It's a really, really funny film. There's some moments in that are hilarious. But that's what the first date felt like. It felt like Emily, I was Emily's interesting person that she brought back to her family. And funny questions all the way through. And like you said, the good thing is it gets, you know, it's a good icebreaker. It gets all the questions out of the way simultaneously. I'm not going to do it for every single one of the members of the family. That was great. It was just a bit daunting meeting all of them on the first date. But I kind of sit there, like every so often, like I'd be brushing my teeth and I sit there thinking, imagine if I'd said no. Imagine if I'd been, no, I'm not coming inside for a drink, you know? And sometimes you just got to make these things happen. And I think that was it. Like I said, if you caught me 2 months before that, no, absolutely not. I would have been, I'm not going inside. It's not worth the hassle. But in hindsight, it's the best thing I did.
That's incredible. It's just, as you say though, it's just like meeting people in these situations and saying yes that little bit more. And it's like as you may know, I'm doing the whole IVF and so forth. So I've always wanted to be a parent, and me and my ex-partner, we was going for the IVF process together, but he was a no-show to the appointment twice. So I thought, if he's like this now, what would he be like when the child is being born? And it was always about him and his terms on when he's available. My specific clinic was only doing appointments at like on a certain day, and he's like, well, that day doesn't work for me. Why can't they do a Wednesday? And he couldn't quite grasp that we do what the hospital say, not what you say. It doesn't work around you. And he just couldn't process it. So in the end, we broke up, and I always said, if I got to 30 and I'm still single, not dating, I'm going to do IVF as a single parent by choice. And I don't think many people thought I would follow it through. And my 30th birthday came. Thank you, COVID. It was pretty shit. And 2 days later, on the Monday morning, I phoned up and basically said, I'm ready to do my IVF. Can I carry on the process? And only 2 months ago, I had my eggs fertilized, and now I've got embryos ready to go. But again, I don't think people thought I'd see it through up to the point that I have. But as we say, if you want something in life, you have to go after it. You have to chase that dream. And I've put the education first. I've put the work first. And don't get me wrong, relationships have suffered in the past, because working in media, it's 24/7. You're working around the country, and sometimes you have to cancel because you're being sent somewhere, and I can't really say no to the bosses. It's your job. It's what keeps you roof over your head, and it's 24/7. So people just don't get it. So that's why it was always good to date people in the media, because they understand it that little bit more, probably similar to the fitness industry or people that go, they would relate to it as well. But you do have to take these opportunities and just fly with it, really, and take these chances. We live once, and we've got to do it.
Absolutely. I mean, the dating scene is a minefield. I can't imagine dating now, to be honest.
It's horrendous.
Especially post-COVID. Like, I honestly cannot imagine what it's like. I mean, for me, I've always been quite personable. And if there's someone that I think is quite attractive, or there's someone that I'm vibing with, or with us university or college or whatever, it's not even a case of like looking for anything. For me, it was just about sparking up a conversation, or just getting the right vibes of someone, and then one thing leads to the next, and before you know it, one thing leads to another. But I've always been really personable like that. I've never had the fear of going up to someone and being like, oh, would you like to go for a drink sometime? Or, I think you're really pretty. Would you like to go and drink? Or whatever it is, do you know what I mean? Whereas I feel like now you just can't do that. You can't do that at all. Because either people, A, don't know how to do it, or B, people don't know how to react when it's done to them. Because the standard way of actually, meeting someone now seems to be through apps. Unless you meet someone through an app, it doesn't really seem to happen. And I just can't wrap my head around that kind of thinking. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's even just like the worst that can happen is the person says no. That is ultimately the word, the absolute worst outcome is no, they're not interested. Okay, well, there's so many million people in the world. There's another person.
You knock on enough doors, eventually someone's going to let you in, essentially. It's just, valuing yourself, not to just let anybody in, I think is the 100%. Key thing.
And I think that's what some people can do sometimes, is they settle for second. Some people just want to be in a relationship and will just force it, stay with them, they're not happy. But if you want to be number one, you need to be number one yourself. Look after yourself and find the best for you.
That's one thing COVID, I think, has taught me in particular, is that if you want something from life, you've got to do what you want in life. Because, COVID just highlights just how short time is, again, as cliche as it sounds. But, you only get one life, you've got to live it for you at the end of the day. No matter whether you can't always be thinking about, okay, this is best for that person, but it means that I've got to sacrifice something. You can't be living that way, I don't think. But then also it's just having that value in yourself, not to completely sacrifice everything in yourself just to make the people around you happy. And like I said, if you're knocking on doors, someone will let you in, but sometimes you can be so lonely, you will let anybody in. And then before you know it, you're in a relationship, like you said, that you're not happy with, and you end up staying together. And that's no way to live a life. Do you know what I mean?
And it's
So
just knowing your own worth as well and living up to your values and so forth. It's, I went on a date in January and he got drunk one night and told me that he's currently on probation. So I just asked him, oh, what's he done? And he went, oh, I assaulted a paramedic. But
right,
just said it like it's
like it was
something you
nothing.
do every day. And I'm kind of like, okay, I don't think your lifestyle is probably really matching up to mine.
Yeah.
So I was kind of like, yeah, see you later, mate. Like, that's the kind of people now that are coming through on apps, is people that just think violence, drugs, rock and roll is the way forward. And it's difficult, but again, it's knowing your own worth, standing your ground and not settling for second.
Exactly that. And it's like I say, people just don't seem to know how to. I don't know. Is game the right word? Like, do people still have game? I think that's what seems to be lacking from what I can.
Yeah.
My brother's 7 years younger than me. I'm not saying that he hasn't got game, because like he seems to be doing okay. But like I said, he's 7 years younger. You kind of see the difference between like the way that I would approach people and dating and things, and the mindset is completely different. Completely different. But then I also saw something online that showed that there was a 10-year study, and it showed that within the 10 years, ages from 18 to males in particular, from 18 to 24, are having 60% less sex in that age group than they were 10 years ago. 10 years ago. So it's weird to think that I think it highlights the point that people just don't seem to know how to approach the situation.
Yeah.
Because everything is less personal. It's all through apps, and and you might have the odd conversation here and there, but you can't get personality through a text message. No. You can't get personality through little DMs back and forth and whatnot. Which is why it's so difficult, for me, like the amount of graph that you would have to put in through an app just to be able to get to a first date or a first face-to-face meeting. It's just
hard work.
Yeah,
and it's people keep the options open. They're always chasing better, striving for better, and they don't delete them. I'm talking to my friends, the online friends. It's like I was seeing a lad last year for 6 months, and I asked him out to be my boyfriend, and he's like, why do we have to put a label on it? And I'm like, well, are we exclusive? Is it just each other? Like, why are you still on the apps? It's like, oh yeah, well, they're just friends, aren't they? I'm just talking to people. And I was like, don't really think you should be like that if you're seeing someone.
Yeah, no, and like I say, that's becoming more and more common. I think because you've got, in theory, access to a plethora of different people at your fingertips, the temptation, at the very least, it almost becomes an addiction. Like I imagine that if you're using these apps, it almost becomes an addiction to just knowing that you can message anyone here, there, or social media in general is just giving you the opportunity and the ability to just message anybody around the world, and then who knows where it kind of sparks. Whereas, I think I'm fortunate that I came out of the dating game just as all of that was taking off.
No, it's good.
Like I say to you, like I honestly don't know how you do it, mate. I really don't. Like the idea of it alone.
It's hard work. I'm off speed dating tomorrow, so that'll be interesting.
Let me know how it goes.
Crazy age category, 21 to 40. But I'm more of an older person, so I prefer to date older. So I'm in hope most of them are 30 to 40, not like 21, because you're in different complete life stages.
How many 21-year-olds turn up to speed dating, to be fair?
Last week when I went, that category was 21 to 35, and I'd say girl-wise, there was probably about 3 out of 7 girls which were around the 21 age bracket. Most of the guys was 28 to 33.
Do you think everyone in the room was serious, or do you reckon some of them just did it for a laugh?
I think some of them did it for a laugh. You can kind of tell with some of those because they outright told me that they've booked a hotel.
Right, okay.
So I just made the jokes basically. So I'm like, I was like, sorry, I only want to date people that are local. Because obviously, why do you book a hotel if you live local? And then they go, oh no, I do live local, I live in Manchester. I'm like, oh, so why have you booked a hotel? Do you live with your parents or something, wanting to take the girl back? So I try and make that kind of joke. And they're like, well, just in case I drink too much. I'm just like, yeah, you've got other intentions, mate.
Yeah.
So it's like, nah, you're not for me.
Definitely sus, that is.
It's cringy. But as well with like some of your sport as well, like you do your wheelchair basketball coaching and the tennis like you spoke about before here, like you've done some like tennis today. Will we ever see you as like one of our Paralympians for basketball or tennis?
No, I think that ship has sailed. So when I was like 16 years old, actually no, further back than that. So when I was 13, I played wheelchair basketball for a club that was in Mansfield. So it was
Okay.
about an hour drive away during rush hour traffic. It wasn't the easiest of trips for my dad to make. I did one season there, and then I didn't stick with it because I just didn't. I don't think I got on with the coach for starters. And then I didn't like the team aspect of basketball purely because I found it quite cliquey. And obviously with me being the new person in there and being 13 years old, I couldn't quite grasp my head around the clickiness of it all.
Yeah.
So I did one season there, and then I didn't really do any sport until about 16 when I started playing wheelchair tennis. And I fell in love with it immediately because for me, it was one of those things that any progress was on me. It's up to me to be able to excel in it. And I was pretty good. I think my highest world record ranking was like 120, something like that, 119,
Impressive.
something like that. So I wasn't bad. Unfortunately, there's a lot of politics that goes on with anything that involves a medal, because there's obviously money involved with medals, Paralympics, all that kind of stuff. And I think the Paralympics in general, and it's quite an outspoken view, and I apologize if I offend anybody when I say this, but because there's medals and money involved, the disabilities that you find at the top of the game, and again, I don't want to come across as ableist or disableist or anything here, are a lot less severe than the likes of someone like myself. So you look at me with spinal cord injury, paralyzed my armpits down, so I've got no conscious muscle control from below my armpits, most notably my core. So if I'm playing wheelchair tennis against some people that literally walk onto the court and then sit in their chair, they've got full core control, for trunk control, it's already an uphill battle. And then I think at the time when I reached my world record ranking, my highest record ranking, when I looked at the top 100, it was limb loss, amputation, it was like POTS, there was like all these different kind of like ailments. Like, don't get me wrong, they're disabilities and right, 100%. But I think the category, the categorizing for these kind of sports aren't fair enough. I think the playing field isn't fair enough. I mean, using wheelchair tennis as the example, you've got your paraplegics and you've got your quadriplegics, and then there's no in between. So for me, if my spine snapped 2 vertebrae higher, I'd be a quadriplegic. But anything below that, you just get put straight into the other group. And like I said, there's a range of different disabilities. I know it's really difficult to fight.
That's what I found with the basketball is when I trialed out for the Manchester Mavericks, I went along just to train and see how it was. And obviously they ask you about your disability, what you can do, what you can't do, what can you move, what can't you move. And you can see them trying to grade where I would be. And it is a minefield on how they go about it. It's like I'm doing adaptive boxing at the moment.
Yeah.
And that's not a Paralympian sport as yet, but even still trying to get that into the Paralympics and then look at the categories as well for that it's insane. It's difficult.
It's really difficult, and I get it, but I also feel like you might end up actually encouraging more disabled people to get involved with sport if there were a wider range of categories. Because at the moment, I mean, I reached a point in wheelchair tennis where I probably would have ended up being a top of the middle card, trying to break through to the next bit, but I wouldn't ever be able to get there because it's an uphill battle that my body just wouldn't let me kind of plow through. And that's not making an excuse. It's just the sad reality that what I had to kind of get to.
Your body's got limits.
Yeah, exactly that. It's much like adaptive boxing. If I ended up going against adaptive boxing against even you, I might look like I'm a bigger and stronger guy, but if I throw one punch, because I've got no core, my balance is going to take me forwards, at which point, the time that it takes me to put my arms on my legs to lift myself back up, you would have hit me in the head 3 or 4 times at full pelt, and there's nothing I could do about it. And they're the kind of things and the intricacies that I think that the Paralympics and the organizers of that, the Paralympic Committee, they need to actually look at and see whether they can actually increase participation by making things fairer across the board. You know, you might end up with something like swimming, where they've got like, is it 16, 17 different categories of swimming that I think they have, which, you know, on paper, it looks ridiculous, but actually it's probably the fairest one of them all. Wheelchair basketball, with them doing the classification system, and you're only allowed X amount of points on court at a time, I think is a really good way of doing things, because it gives the opportunity to have, you know, you're not just got a full team of people that, you know, might be, you know, missing a limb, or, you know, can't walk for X amount of meters, etc., etc. It actually encourages a whole host and range of disabilities on court all the time. So it's definitely something that needs addressing, and it needs updating, and it needs looking at properly, to make it more inclusive and to encourage more people. I mean, I thought it was mental when we had some of the top tier wheelchair tennis players saying that they should open up classification for wheelchair tennis to able-bodied people. I thought that was mental, because you kind of sit there and you think, okay, it might be okay for, you know, some of the top wheelchair tennis players in the world whose wheelchair is insured for £100,000. It might be good for them to play against able-bodied people in wheelchairs. But for anybody that's then trying to engage in sport and try to climb through the ranks, they've got no chance, absolutely no chance. Or for those that have got more severe disabilities, they've got no chance of competing with that.
It's interesting what you say there about the tennis, because in the adaptive boxing that I go, sometimes you might get, is it's in a proper boxing place, we might get semi-pro boxers come in, and our coach will, we may watch them train and they're stood up boxing away, and my coach will say to them, well, why don't you sit down and have a go? And you can see like a bit of sheer panic in them as well, because they're kind of like, because you've got to move your chair forward sideways, your hands are down here, they're not protecting your face, and I could just and hit them in the face. So they were saying it's where they're thinking about the footwork, they can still keep the hands up, but when you're in a chair, you've got to move. And they found that difficult to process, but it gives them that understanding as well, on that other skill that we need to take on board when doing it from an adaptive position.
Absolutely. And I think like basketball is similar. When you get, I mean, I always challenge like able-bodied ballers. So like when I was running the university team over at Trent, we went over to the men's basketball team and said to them, like, you know, you think your ball is now on your feet, try doing it in a chair. And then the moment that they realize that actually I can't jump when I take this shot, or I can't use any of my legs or the footwork or anything else, I've got to bounce the ball while moving the wheelchair, it does open up a whole different perspective. But they love it. They love it every single time.
So you've even got the height as well. And that's the bit I struggled with. Like when I'm stood, I can probably score a hoop. But when I'm sat, because I'm like so much lower, it's got to have more of a power to get up. It's a completely different mindset. Obviously, you've still got your 2 taps on the ball for a call correctly, and trying to do that, not lose the ball, still push your chair. It's like you can do 2 wheel spins, 2 taps, and it's just like, oh my God, so much to process.
Yeah, it's just 1 bounce to every 2 touches of the wheel in basketball. And there's a lot going on. You know, there's so much going on. And this is the same thing with any, I think, wheelchair sport in particular. Everything happens in a split second. I mean, tennis in particular, or badminton, you know, those kind of racket sports. I mean, badminton's even faster paced than tennis is, because the shuttlecock drops so quickly. But, you know, all these kind of sports, the great thing is, you know, without sounding, you know, I've been quite pessimistic and a bit negative towards, you know, disability sport and at the competitive level, like how I think, you know, how less exclusive the top level is, or how the opportunities to get to the top level isn't very good. Because I think this is the problem. A lot of different sports, when it comes to disability, and all the governing bodies, they do a lot of work at grassroots level to get people involved in the sport. They have to, because if they're not getting people constantly involved in the sport, people are going to age out and then the sport's going to die. And then they give a lot of support to people at the very top of the game. Obviously, it's a select few, but they get a lot of funding and a lot of support, a lot of time. But then those that are middle of the pack, that are trying to break through and try and go, they get the odd scraps that are thrown to them. And I'm not saying that things should be handed out to them. I think that people that are at the top deserve to be at the top. But I think there's very few opportunities to dethrone those that have already been decided that they're going to be at the top. Does that make sense? But like I said, the good thing is we do a lot of good work at grassroots level across all sports, whether that's badminton, basketball. Adaptive boxing is new on the market, and it's something that's, coming through. There's obviously a lot of teething problems with it, and there's a lot of things that I think there's going to be difficulties getting it into the Paralympics through. Because trying to find, I mean, boxing from an able-bodied perspective, you can barely call it a sport as it is, because it's basically legal assault.
Yeah, it's a very tricky one.
Exactly that. I mean, I remember when I did sports law at university, boxing and the UFC and that kind of thing was one of the modules that we did on that. And then when we were looking at that from a legal perspective, you kind of sit there and think, yeah, this is borderline. Exactly that. It's one of those gray areas, I think. And when you then add disability to it, and you add, the extra risk of injury, or if there's liability. I mean, even where I'm working at the gym now. So one of the things that I've been pushing at Pure Gym for a long time is, as we touched on earlier in the podcast, offering myself to be someone who takes charge of disability education across the company, and help to educate the PTs and make sure that all of the facilities are properly adaptive and whatnot, and offering myself to take charge of that. Even in that kind of industry, I remember being told by one of the higher up board members that as noble, and the exact quote was, as noble and great as that sounds, health and safety legislation will always trump disability legislation. So read into that however you want. But from a corporate standpoint, that just goes to show the way that disability is viewed. They would much rather not. I don't know how. I'm not sure how his head was processing. I'm not sure whether he thought that, if we encourage more people with disability in through our doors, it then leaves us more open to lawsuits in case they get injured on our premises because we're not then kitted out for it. I'm not sure. That's how I interpret it personally.
But it's always interesting because they say they're accessible for all. And are they though?
A gym for everyone, right?
Yeah.
A gym for everyone, yeah.
But then they're not truly living up to it.
Well, this is it. On paper, you might sit there and they could argue, we are a gym for all, because on their DDA guidelines, they have a disabled access door. They have lift in most of the gyms, not all of the gyms, even though the SEO that contacted me saying that we're doing a piece on accessibility, because obviously all of our gyms are accessible. And I'm like, no, they're not. I was like, some of the gyms in London, they're in listed buildings, and there's steps to get actually into the gym.
Yeah.
And there's no lift because it's in a listed building. They weren't able to put a lift into it. So that's the first and foremost thing that needs to be addressed. It's like, actually let people know what is accessible and what isn't.
Yeah, and what is accessibility is the other one we touched upon before. You've got being able to navigate and get entry in onto each floor and go to your toilets, but then what about Braille? So I could always touch upon the one that I go to at the moment. If I tried the cycle class the other day, if I was to go in my wheelchair, I can't get in because I can't navigate around all the bikes. I'd have to leave it at the door and walk in myself and take my crutch, where the sports kind of area, that I could go around perfectly fine, no problem. But if I wanted the hydro water, where you have to type in your PIN code and then put your flask under, it's at a higher level, so I'd have to be able to stand to then type it in to get the water. They do it in some ways, but not in every way.
Exactly that. And I think this is where if they had someone like myself in that kind of position that can oversee all of these kind of things and have that input, it would make a gym truly for everyone.
And the other thing as well is they know, as a company, as a corporate company, because we have to say if we need accessible, so we'll get the fob, how many of their members have a disability. They could even reach out to all of us as members and trainers and coaches to then create a focus group, which is then around the country, different lived experiences, to then consult us, and we can help them. It doesn't only help them, it helps us too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as long as they acted on the focus group's opinions, absolutely. I think from experience from some focus groups or from some companies, I'm not saying Pure Gym in particular, but some companies that will do a focus group for the sake of doing a focus group to make it look like they're actually doing exactly that. And this is what I'm saying, like it goes back to what we said earlier on the podcast, like people either do the bare minimum or they go above and beyond. There's no middle ground. And at the moment, most places, I think as soon as you go corporate, I mean, even in my time at Pure Gym, from being there 6 years before they actually floated on the stock market and became a public company, the change that has happened within the company within that time, yes, COVID has happened as well, and it's been very, very difficult for the leisure industry in general. Doesn't mean that the profits haven't been bad. But at the moment that you kind of turn it into a corporate company, the way the company is ran, the demeanor from management and those that are higher up, everything changes. It changes massively, and they become much less open to these kind of things where disability is an afterthought. It's not something that they want to be making a priority, which I think is insane, considering that they do label themselves as a gym for everyone. And they have got assets within the company that can actually sit there and help change things and help navigate them through this to actually truly make it a gym for everyone.
I can't find one video on their website, especially when it comes to the gym classes, where there's interviews of anyone with a disability or be in the background on any of their videos, because I'm trying to watch them to find out, is that something I can do, or I might not be able to do it the non-disabled way, but okay, could I adapt it? But you've got your articles on there, which is obviously how I came across you, but then there's no videos to then accompany it, because obviously Pure don't want it. So it's kind of like you've got it if you want to do the other bits.
I think there's no cohesion, and there's I think the problem is that in those that, so for example, the SEO that reached out to me and said, well, we're doing some pieces on disability, and then I was looking through obviously their contacts. I was one of them, because generally speaking, anything that came with disability, it was generally me. So if you actually went through the Pure Gym like official Instagram page, there was a phase where they were just constantly retweeting me, because it's like, oh, this is a tick box exercise. It's a colored person in a wheelchair. We're doing multiple things here. It looks great. But then when she reached out to me, she was like, oh, there's these pieces that I want to do. Is there anything that we can kind of do together? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. But then like what her vision was compared to what maybe her manager's vision was, it wasn't necessarily the same, and it didn't add up. And then obviously it comes into like budget in terms of like, okay, if you want videos being filmed, and that might be something else, but it was never even discussed, to be fair. The videos and everything wasn't even discussed. It was more, very much so just a blog with the written examples on how to do things.
And again, it's the bare minimum, isn't it? It's, oh, well, let's do a blog.
And I think this was the difficulty that I found writing the blog, in the sense where you don't want to paint any disability with, well, every disability with the same brush, because everything is so individualized. And I think when it came to writing those blogs, it was really, really difficult, because I didn't want to assume anything, and I didn't want to just say like, okay, this might be right for this person, but it's not going to be right for this person, which I think is why we kind of narrowed it down to wheelchair users, just because it was the easiest thing to actually properly adapt and eloquently put into words. I think was the biggest thing, because I didn't want to just come across as someone that just thought that every disability was going to be the same. Because that was the last thing that I wanted. They
came across really well. I enjoyed them, and even if people maybe are able to stand and do fitness stood up but live with a disability as well, it's been able to sit down and also do them, and it gives people those options as well. But I think definitely. We need to give the CEOs of Pure another email and keep bombarding them, and let them know it's to improve things for them, but not just them, for the community as well. If I'm quoting their statements of accessible for all and we're for everyone.
No, it's got to a point where I feel like I'm hitting my head against a brick wall, because I've approached it from not just a moral standpoint, not just from a financial standpoint, statistically as well. As a population, we're getting older, we're getting
20% plus.
Exactly. Even in the next 10 years, I think we're expected to have another, just in our country alone, another 250,000 blind people within the next 10 years as it is. So, trying to get ahead of that curve and actually make things more accessible, little
captions, like BSL on the videos, Braille on the buildings.
BSL, or even those that are visually impaired and they still have some sight, making sure the lighting is suitable in there, or making sure there's decent contrast. Because
and the same with neurodiversity, lights can make a big difference.
100%.
Carpets, colours.
100%, or even just having a small area for a quiet area for those that are struggling, with autism, or those these are all really simple things. When the studio isn't being used, for example, or for those that actually have studios that are closed off or anything like that, use that as a quiet area. It's not even changing anything. It's not actually costing anything. It's just
It's
changing the
utilising a
type of.
facility that's already there, but
Exactly.
letting it know it's a quiet
And
time.
these are all the kind of different things that, I think could be really well implemented. And then ultimately, it's the education. It's education across the PTs, so that they're not afraid of if someone with a disability does approach you. Don't get me wrong, some PTs sit there, they'll embrace it, and they'll be really, really good, and they'll be able to use their imagination to work with someone and be able to adapt the sessions accordingly. Whereas other people are going to be like a deer in the headlights, and they're not going to have any clue on in terms of what to do.
The bit that makes me laugh with the classes when they ask you right at the start, has anybody got any? It's always injuries. Has anyone got any injuries that I need to know about? Well, and you've got like a 5-second window. Well, A, mine's not an injury, and B, it's going to take a little bit longer than 5 seconds at the start of a class to tell you which you've just walked into.
Yeah. So in theory, a PT should be, ready outside the door to welcome everyone in 5 or 10 minutes before the class starts, to be able to ask whether there's any injuries or anything individually, so that someone can answer up or whatever. But in reality, if they're doing back-to-back classes, they haven't got that luxury to be able to just go in from one to another. But then they have no say in the timetabling. They don't know what it is. But legally, they have to ask that question to make sure that they've ticked all their boxes and they're doing things properly. But it takes away from the experience. In an ideal world, a PT would be able to be in there 10 minutes beforehand and discuss with anybody whether there is any specific needs that they need. For me, when I was teaching the class, it was very much so a case of like, okay, I'm going to be at the front of the room. If there's any specific injuries or disabilities or something that someone needs to talk about before we start, please come talk to me at the front beforehand so that I can adapt things accordingly so that you get the most out of it. That was usually my kind of line or something along those lines to make sure that people have the best experience possible, rather than just a tick box of any injuries. No, okay, let's get started.
It's just literally like that. So I love my two at mine. I think they're great. They're real decent people, and I have had conversation with them because one of them gave me my health and safety tour, and we had a chat there. So she's aware, and I made it quite clear. Sometimes, depending on the class, I might be in my wheelchair, and on some, I might be doing it from a crutch. It will just depend on the session, and we'll take it from there. And they're both cool with it. But then when I went to the cycle class the other day, it was, right, anybody got any injuries? No, okay, great, right, let's crack on, right, change this knob here, do a bit of this.
Yeah.
Where within that, he was like, oh, you need a minimum of 140 RPM, minimum of 140 RPM. Well, I've got 2 braces and blinking foot drop and everything else. There's no way my legs are going to go that quick. Where I would have quite liked him to say to me, okay, I know you might not be able to get to 140, but maybe 80 could be my adaptation, or to give me my own target to push towards. Like, I couldn't even get to 80, but it gives you kind of an idea. But it's given me something to work towards where they've got the 140. Well, what's mine?
Yeah, no, 100%.
Otherwise, you're just going as high as possible, and it's kind of like
yeah. And a lot of that, like I said, comes down to lack of education. I think lack of exposure and experience in working with disability. A lot of it is blissful ignorance at the end of the day, because you don't tend to see a lot of. You're seeing more of it now, obviously, but visually disabled people kind of in the gym. I think we're really fortunate with the fact that I've been where I am for 6 years now, and predominantly working with those with disability and injury rehab. We get a lot of different disabilities in our gym, so it's kind of the norm, and then the staff members that come in, that they kind of adapt to it quickly. But it's very much so, an anomaly. It's not what the standard experience you're going to get across the entire company, and that's a shame, because when they have a vessel and they have the facilities and they have an asset that can be utilized in there, they're just not doing it. And whether that's from a financial reason, or whether that's from a health and safety reason, or whether it's just from archaic thinking, I don't know. Or it might just be that back off. I don't know what's going on truly at back office. It could be that everything's on fire and they're trying to douse fires left, right, and centre caused by COVID. I really don't know. But at the end of the day, for me, it ultimately comes down to the more exposure that you have towards disability for the staff and for disability in general, the better the experience is going to be for everybody. And you're also adding another skill set to each PT that's in the company too.
And it's giving them that education as well and helping them out. But I'm all in if you need to get a team together, all the people together to obviously make the fitness industry and talk to people about, you know, what we can offer. And, you know, we want to work with them. We're not there to work against them. It's like images on the website. There's not one with a disabled person on a crutch or maybe using a cane or in a wheelchair. Nothing, but they're for everyone. But I don't see myself reflected. Where Salford Leisure Centre, they actually pinpointed me out and a very elderly person in the gym, and they was like, can we do a photo shoot with you for our website, please? And I was on the personal trainer session. So they wanted the crutch on display, so like my back brace and stuff. So then other people then that are watching it can go, oh, there's somebody like me there that's having a personal training session. So obviously there were forced images, but I'm already in the gym, so I do go. But it helps people.
Yeah, it's exposure. I mean, if you think about how, you know, they're talking about, let's use superheroes as an example. They're talking about how there's a lack of black superheroes that's shown on screen and all that kind of stuff. And you're getting more and more of that kind of showing up now, which is great because it gives, you know, the younger kids to say like, oh, I could be like that person. You don't have that for disability because it's not desirable. It's not cool. It's still taboo. But you still need, like, people with disabilities still exist. They still need somebody to be able to go and look at and think like, okay, they're doing it. So why can't I do that? And, you know, it's one of those things where, I mean, my social media, I know that Pure Gym said to me like, oh, you know, use your social media, try to build up a following and see whether you can, you know, get some traction through that. And then we will then, you know, I'm not sure why my social media following would impact my ability to, you know, train the PTs and make the Pure Gym more accessible in general. But that's what they wanted me to do. But then it just feels so forced. And I sit there and I think, you know, it's all good and you know, those images are necessary. And there have been people that have reached out to me and said, I'm so glad that I've came across this because it showed me ways that I can use exercises that I didn't think I'd be able to do. Or even when I put my traveling pictures up on there, you know, when I was like training in Dubai, it's like, oh, it's amazing to see, you know, someone in a wheelchair living that luxurious lifestyle of, you know, on a beach, doing a gym session. It's amazing. And those kind of images are really powerful. Because I know that if I'd seen that when I was younger, I would have been like, well, he's doing it, so why the hell can't I?
Yeah.
But they just don't have that. They don't have that exposure because it's not desirable. And that's the stigma that needs to change.
And it's like that social model, medical model of disability where a lot of the environments at the moment is people follow the medical model, which is we're the problem.
Yeah.
Where the social model will look at the environment. So you spoke about going to your partner's house at the very first point is the problems with the house having the steps. If there was a ramp, boom, wheel in, absolutely no issue. You're not the problem. Is the same with buildings. If you've got a listed building and you can't have a ramp, the problem's with the building, not with you. And trying to get everybody to understand that, you know, we follow the social model, not the medical. Like, we don't need to be fixed. We don't need all that side of things. And it's I think that can go down a long way.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's definitely switching more to what we need to switch towards the social model, definitely more so.
And what's going to be next for you then, Rob?
Honest answers, I'm not sure. COVID kind of killed all momentum that I had. And then I went back to work officially last April.
Okay.
So I've only been back at work for about a year and I've had to rebuild the client base a lot of the time. And then also navigating, you know, COVID waters. It still exists. It's still a thing. It's still a threat. I'm working with people with disabilities and vulnerable people. So I need to be cautious with all of that. So I think I'm pretty much just back at a point now where the business is good. I'm working good hours. I'm not working silly amounts of times like I was, I think, prior to COVID. I was working part-time for the council. I was doing my PTing over at Pure Gym. I was coaching basketball and tennis. It was a lot of things going on. Whereas now my work-life
lots of plates spinning.
Yeah, exactly that. Whereas my work-life balance is much better now. I think for me, I'm kind of a Swiss Army knife that's needs to figure out how I'm best to be utilized, I think, is the key thing. Whether that's from my legal background or just my ability as a person to adapt to generally any situation that I'm in, but then also my expertise in disability and fitness and sport and all that kind of thing is trying to put myself in the right room, I think, is the next thing. I just need to figure out what room that is, whether it's with Pure Gym or whether it's with a competitor or whether it's something entirely different. And in an ideal world, if I can start my own gym or something like that, I don't know.
That'd be amazing.
It would be fantastic. But I think finding the premises and the funds and all that kind of stuff would be amazing. I think, there's in Leicester, there's a place, I think it's called the Matt Hampton Foundation, something like that, where they specialize in obviously injury rehab and disability and that kind of stuff. If I could open up something like that for myself, that would ultimately be an amazing thing to do.
I agree with that we need more of those sort of places as well, because then it can help people out, and it will give us that safe space as well to be in, because then you'd identify with other people whom are in similar situations to you as well, maybe even like with adaptable equipment. So if you wanted to do a rower, it's being able to pull up your wheelchair and being able to adapt into different things.
And that's it, it goes back to that, like you said, that whole medical versus social model, like looking at equipment, there's no reason whatsoever why, gyms can't have a fixed seat on a rower so that, people can get out and then get on that fixed seat and then be able to at least do the upper body part of a rower. But they just don't think about that kind of stuff. Or even a disability bench, when it comes to bench pressing, you can get disabled racks so that your feet aren't dangling off these narrow benches. There's things that are there and they cost similar amount to what the normal racks are, but because it's labeled as disability, people are thinking that they're not going to invest in it. As I said, it would be amazing to be able to do it as like a specialized area, but then also the devil advocate in me is that they're thinking, well, I don't want to segregate. I'd rather integrate and have a gym for everybody, a true gym for everybody. But we'll have to start somewhere. And I think for me, it's
don't we need to tackle PR? We'll come at them with all angles.
Yeah, exactly that. So I think for me, it's just trying to sit there and figure out where I need to be. It's difficult, because I sit there and I think for 6 years, I've done an amazing job. It sounds a bit arrogant. I've done a good job where I am the last 6 years. But also, when you limit yourself to a locality, there's only so many disabled people in that area that you can essentially help. And I've helped a lot. And now it's just figuring out, okay, there are always going to be more disabled people that are going to need help. And we live in an area where, we get students come in all the time and elderly population. It's a really varied area. But everything has its time limit. And I think for me, it's just trying to figure out what next, to be honest, or which room should I be in next.
And if any of my listeners and followers want to as well check you out and the work in which you're doing, they can obviously head to www.movfitness.com, and it's also then the same handle on Instagram, movfitness. And you've got an array of resources on there. You've got the videos and so forth on Insta, and drop Rob a message. Are you doing online sessions as well at the moment, Rob, due to COVID?
I can do online. I think COVID, the biggest challenge that was trying to figure out how we can help those with disabilities actually carry on training without the equipment there, because people either don't have the equipment, the space, or the helping hand they might need there physically. And very few of those aren't in place. So I do offer them if they need them. My social media has been lacking for a while. I apologize for that, but I will pick it back up. And the website is currently in a redesign process as well. But if you go onto my Instagram, for sure, send me any messages you have, and I'm more than happily reply to you.
Thank you. Well, hopefully we can put the fitness world to rights and start to improve gyms and live up to what their standards should be, which is accessible and inclusive for everyone. And hopefully we can tackle the fitness industry, Rob.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today's podcast, and hopefully we can get the next generations of disabled followers and listeners joining, so that the new gyms are for them and that there are people out there and coaches that can assist them when it does come to accessibility.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.